They can take my information if they want to, and maybe they'll clone me. Hey guys, so it's been about a month since I shipped in my 23&Me results, and I'm here today with my friend Susan. And we're gonna be talking about our results together because she's one of my friends who also took 23&Me, and she's also Armenian. So I thought we'd compare and contrast our results and just have a discussion about it. So Susan, say hello to the followers.
Hi.
And when did you take your test?
I took my test actually a year ago. I got it around Christmas time last year.
Oh, wow. So let's get right into it. Basically, my results say that I am 87.2% Northern West Asian. So underneath that, it goes into specifics of 83.1% is Iranian, Caucasian, and Mesopotamian. So the region that I have the strongest matches in is Tehran, Iran, which I do have ancestry in. And then there's about 7 other provinces in Iran where I have DNA matches. So basically, that is the gist of my results. I do have matches. I do have a general match in Armenia, which I am Armenian, but it doesn't have any specific regions of Armenia where I'm a match. I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Susan to go through her results with you guys.
Well, first of all, my family's from Turkey, but we're of Armenian descent. So my results were a little similar to yours, but also pretty different.
Okay.
So for me, it has me down as Northwest Asian for 88%. And then underneath that, it's Iranian, Caucasian, and Mesopotamian as well, 75%. And then it goes down to Anatolian with 3%. And then under my Iranian, Caucasian, Mesopotamian section, it breaks it down with Turkey, Eastern provinces, which would be Western Armenia. And then it also has Armenia as a possible match. I don't have any relatives, like direct, like grandparents or aunts or anything that live in Armenia, but it has me down as possible match in Yerevan.
Wow.
But as far as I know, I don't know anyone that lives there.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I thought those were two, one interesting fact, and then the other one I already knew about.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like in my case, it was also something similar where the Iranian, like for example, Tehran and some of the other provinces, I know I have distant relatives there. And then I did find something similar to yours where it was kind of like a wow, which was, it's a region called Harpert in Turkey. And I did not have any idea about any possible ancestry or relatives in Eastern Turkey. So I think it's kind of interesting.
That is pretty interesting, especially because you weren't aware of it.
Yeah. And so before we met up today, Susan actually shared a really cool podcast with me about DNA kits and 23&Me. And it was a 30-minute podcast, and I'm gonna link it down in the description below. One thing that stuck out to me from the podcast was that the samples that they're putting our DNA samples against are actually pretty limited. One of the people on the podcast who took the test, for example, she knows that she has Indonesian ancestry. But when she took the test, I think they said that...
I think they thought she was Filipino.
Yeah, and so the test came out saying that she's Filipino, but when they actually did some further research, they found that for the entire region of Southeast Asia, which has about 500 million people, they only had about 120 samples from that region.
Which is ridiculous.
Which is ridiculous. And so sometimes, depending on what region of the world you're from, you could be compared to very minimal data, and that is going to skew your results extremely. So it kind of got me wondering how many samples there are from our region, and I'm willing to bet that it's also not that much. So I think during the podcast they mentioned that the biggest amount of data is actually from Western European populations. And so I think for that community it is very useful because it'll give them a lot to compare against. But for other groups it might not be as accurate.
Right. They're just waiting on more results to show up so that they can compare it to, but just the data's not there right now.
One thing that's interesting is when you're paired up with some of your DNA relatives, would you want to share with the audience a little about if you've connected with anyone and how that worked?
So within your results, it shows you the percentage of DNA that you share with someone. And it also has information about like where they're from and also like their full names. So you can kind of see where in your family line they rest. They are. So it was really interesting for me to see people who are my cousins, but maybe immigrated here or were like survivors of the Armenian genocide and came to the United States in the early 1900s.
Wow.
And they're trying to figure out who they're related to because they've lost touch with their relatives.
Yeah.
And on my dad's side, I'm Pontic Greek, like half, or a little bit, not half. And according to my ancestry DNA. And so I have this whole Greek side that I don't know, and I'm like matching with people with Greek last names because we're cousins, but we don't know each other. And it's really interesting. And so it's a great way to just connect with people. You can message each other, and it's just really interesting to see all that information.
You do pre-populate some of your information, such as where your grandparents were born and that sort of thing. So it's kind of important to have the accurate information, or maybe not populated at all. For example, I haven't gone through and populated just because I'm still a little unsure. And I think you had a match where this person was saying that their ancestors were from Armenia, but technically they weren't from Armenia because this is during the Ottoman Empire. So things like that I feel like can skew, they won't skew results like the DNA results, but they'll skew just the information that you get from your relatives. Who is this test for? We already kind of talked about how the data sets are overwhelmingly Western European, which makes complete sense. But as we add to the data, as the rest of the world adds to the data, we can get more accurate results for other people. But I started thinking that this is a very useful tool for people who have ancestry that is plagued by different things like oppression, genocide, gendered violence, and in general just a exchange of DNA, one, and two, when you're displaced, because that is going to take you away from where your ancestors are from. And so I think that the more people from these groups, such as Armenians, take the tests, we're going to get better results and we're going to be able to know more about our history. What do you think?
I agree. And the fact that a lot of written history is missing, especially in our culture because of the genocide, it's hard to map out our history.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like the cultures that know their history, I mean, we know our history, like you said, in a general way, but if you know your own lineage and also tracing back to exactly where you came from, I think it does give you a sense of pride and just understanding of even subcultures within your culture. Overall, I do want to encourage the viewers to take the test, regardless of what background you're from. Definitely if you're Armenian and maybe from other groups that might benefit more from this information, but regardless of what background you come from, I think it's a useful tool. That being said, I do think that there's a lot of information that is hard to interpret.
Right.
And like you said, it is ever evolving as we add more data or as they discover new things. So it's kind of like a growing body of knowledge. It's not just like a final thing. I think it's also useful for other groups of people, especially in cases of conflict and genocide and things like that, where the other party may also take these tests and find out that they have ancestry within the other group. Right. So I think it might serve as a bridge to bring people together.
Absolutely. So Adaik and I actually know each other from Humboldt State, and we had the Armenian Student Association, or club, Armenian Club, unofficial association.
Unofficial, yeah.
And it's really, there were like 5-6 of us, 5-6 Armenian students, and on April 24th, we did a Screamers documentary. Screamers is a documentary. It was produced by Carla, I can't remember her last name, Garabetian, I might be wrong, and System of a Down. And so it kind of goes into explaining what the Armenian genocide is, why it happened, why it's not being recognized by the Turkish and the United States governments, and it kind of goes into all of that. But so that was going to be shown in the evening. So that morning, I went to the bank, and our university was a tiny university in the middle of nowhere in Northern California, like 8,000 people living there.
Yeah.
Okay, and as I'm going to the bank, I see a guy who looked really Armenian to me. Like, wow. He was Armenian.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, so then I go into the parking lot, I park, I'm walking to the bank, and he tells me the bank is closed. It's not open yet. And I go, okay, cool, thanks. Hey, are you Armenian? And he's like, no, I'm Turkish. And I was like, whoa, what?
Wow.
And I happen to speak Turkish because my family's from Turkey. My grandparents never got to learn Armenian. And so I speak Turkish fluently. And I just started talking to him in Turkish. And he was just like, what the hell? Like, what? Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, I told him I was Armenian. And he was just like, whoa, and you're speaking, speaking Turkish to me, whatever. So he's like, you want to grab some coffee? We go to the cafe, we're talking. And as we're talking, he says, you know, you're not the first person to tell me that I look Armenian. And that before what happened, I may have been Armenian. I'm from Diyarbakir.
Wow.
So there, you know, like I may have Armenian ancestry. And I said, yeah, that's possible. You know, like you're probably not wrong. And it was just like insane. Like he and I, someone who identifies as being a Turkish man, and me, an Armenian woman, we were able to have a conversation and talk, and he opened up about that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people who either know or don't know that they have Armenian ancestry but are living as Turks.
There are 2 to 4 million hidden Armenians in Turkey. So what that means is that there are people who have full or partial Armenian ancestry, and they either know it and they can't tell anybody, or they just they themselves don't know that information. Right. So it's actually mind-boggling to think about that. And I think that's very common in other groups as well, where there is oppression, like I said, gendered violence, yes, rape, and things like that, where your ancestry is obviously changed based on what is happening. And I've seen that here with different groups, and I know that's the case with Armenians in Turkey. I love Susan's example because it just shows how you can either approach something. I mean, she could have easily been like, oh, you're Turk, I'm not going to hang out with you, I'm not going to sit with you, which happens all too often. But I think the fact that she was able to get past that and actually sit down with this person, it reignited something in that other person about their own culture and heritage, and you never know what impact that can have. Maybe he went on to learn more about his Armenian identity, and actually there's a bunch of hidden Armenians who are now rediscovering their Armenian identity, and they're going back to their Armenian roots. They're changing their Turkish names back to Armenian. They're actually developing a relationship with the country of Armenia. Wow. And I've met a few people who have done that because I did go on a trip to Eastern Turkey, which is where historic Armenia was. And a lot of these people are actually reawakening in their culture.
That's amazing. And sad at the same time that they couldn't live with the back to being Armenian because of what was going on around them.
So another thing I wanted to mention on that is that a lot of these people, specifically the hidden Armenians, who do rediscover their heritage, these people, they don't have a choice but to deny their Armenianness. And we've seen that in some of the hidden Armenians who are coming out, because it's literally a coming out process, and their family will shun them, and they will actually be excommunicated at times.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've gotten to meet a few of them. One of them in particular, his name is Adam, his new Armenian name, and he's very outspoken, and he is in this process of rediscovering his heritage and also trying to grapple with his family about these issues. Because they're obviously not on board, they fully reject that identity.
That's really sad.
Yeah. Susan actually reminded me of a book that I let her borrow like 10 years ago.
Literally like 10 years ago.
That she never read. But basically this book is called Virgin, and I found it, I think when I was in high school at the library. And basically it's like the Armenian Anne Frank. So if you guys are interested in something that is a personal story, it's about a survivor of the Armenian genocide, I would highly recommend this book. And I'm also gonna leave it for Susan to hopefully read.
I'm gonna read it.
So thank you, Susan, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
This was so fun. If you guys do have any questions or comments for either of us, let us know in the comments below. Alright guys, so that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, comment, and definitely subscribe to hear more from me. Bye now.
Bye.